Hello and welcome to BCM 241 Media Ethnographies. Today I am very fortunate to be joined by Dr. Chris Comerford. Chris is a lecturer at the University of Wollongong, currently based at the Liverpool campus in southwest Sydney, although, as we all are, in online remote delivery mode. There in spirit, if not there in body. And Chris is working with the first intake of students at the Liverpool campus. And from what we hear, it's going really well. So special hello to our friends at Liverpool. Chris is a fan scholar and a scholar fan, what Henry Jenkins would call an ACCA fan. And Chris, I would love you to tell us just a little bit about your PhD, which was on Batman.
It was. So I finished my PhD 4 years ago, and it was at the University of Technology, Sydney, and it was a study of post 9/11 American pop culture and the way that it brings forward narratives, real and fictional, around post 9/11 life and around ideas of invasion culture and surveillance culture and the America good, everyone else bad kind of binaries. And the key case study for that was a series of Batman stories. So a whole lot of comics, a whole lot of the movies, the video games, just a whole lot of Batman stuff. It was a political analysis. It was a fan studies analysis. It was a cultural studies, screen studies. It was a whole lot of different aspects all rolled into one that just talked on how Batman stands as an example alongside things like the Marvel movies and Star Trek and things like that bring forward really important issues into American and international public discourse.
I'm really interested in this for a couple of reasons. Both, Batman is awesome, but the way in which we've kind of been talking a little bit about, and we'll come back next week, in the way that fan material and fan labor becomes content for an entirely new what I call niche creative industries that we're seeing on YouTube, Patreon, Twitch, where fan knowledge, fan experience becomes the kind of means by which we can have really productive, interesting careers, both inside academia and more broadly in the media industries. But I've invited Chris along today to talk about a new study that he is engaged in. Chris, do you want to just tell us a little bit about what your study is?
I do. So my wonderful BCM 241 students will already know all about this because I think I've talked about it a few times in class already. But basically, I'm a huge fan of the video game Animal Crossing New Horizons, which surprises me because I've never touched an Animal Crossing game before this one and probably never would have. But what really interested me about playing it is that it came out just as a lot of the international COVID lockdowns came into effect or already were in effect. So it was right before most parts of Australia went into lockdown. And the game's popularity exploded as a result because it became this game that so many people, existing fans, people like me who'd never gone near the series before, all picked up and played at home during the lockdown and used it as a means of not only social connection, because it's a game, it's a life simulator where you are given control of a little island with a whole bunch of cute little animal people, and the goal is to restore the island to look really gorgeous and get lots of tourists and things like that. And it's a game that encourages social connectivity. It's got a multiplayer function. It's got a whole lot of stuff around having people visit your island in real life. But what also works well for it is it's a routine game. So there are things you do in there that, because it runs in real time, an hour in the real world is an hour in game, in the in-game clock, and it has a whole lot of tasks that you can do every day. So trash washes up on the shore of your beach, you can tidy that up. You've got fruit trees that grow that you can then harvest and sell the fruit to the local stores. You can dig for fossils. You can, reshape parts. Later on in the game, you can reshape parts of your island. But it's good at instilling a sense of routine. routine. So the things that you can do each day, the stores that are open at this part of the day and then close at this part of the day. That sense of routine and that sense of structure and familiarity was really interesting. And I think from what I've looked at so far, it's what a lot of people really liked about the game, specifically because of the lockdown, where all our routines and all our life structures pretty much got thrown in the bin. And this was then a way to stand in for a lot of that which had been lost. So what I'm doing at the moment is looking at the player responses to that phenomenon and where they've engaged with Animal Crossing because it stood in for the lost routines of their lives and how it's given them some structure and some routine for their lives under COVID. And to look at the way that the uniqueness of their play styles factors into that, because one of the things that the game is really good at doing is allowing you to choose your own method of play, the tasks you want to complete, and your own methods of gratification. So if you want to complete the main goal of making the island pretty, you can do that. If you want to stave that off for a while and just go pick up trash, you can. If you want to grow flowers, if you want to build lots of cool buildings and fences and make your island look a certain way, like, it's up to you to choose how you play the game and what tasks in the game are meaningful and rewarding to you. So I'm looking at the personas of different play styles that emerge because of all this that's happening and the way that people have got their sense of routine back, but they've also then chosen for themselves a particular way of playing to go with that routine.
I'm hoping that we can have shots or some video of Animal Crossing over the conversation to help those who aren't familiar with the game. But as we were talking before, there are tensions in terms of YouTube video, including Nintendo content. Nintendo will actively copyright strike. And my channel has had a copyright strike because of trying to show Nintendo. So and we should say that this is a Nintendo Switch game, isn't it? This is only available on the Nintendo Switch.
Yes, and it is one of the reasons why the Switches all got sold out right as soon as the pandemic started, because everyone wanted this game. It's a killer app if ever there was one.
The cost of the Nintendo Switch consoles on eBay were phenomenal when they all sold out. It was this unique perfect storm of these conditions. And so there's a couple of things there I want to follow up on. The first is that this is very much a fan ethnography. So you are proposing to do a series of questionnaires, and then following the questionnaire, you are intending to then do interviews with some of the respondents.
Yeah, so I put out a survey, as we're recording this, it was a couple of weeks ago. It was open for a week, and it was a series of questions. There were quantitative and qualitative, so a bunch of multiple choice ones and some free answer questions. A lot of it was fairly basic. It was things like, how long have you been playing for? How'd you get started on the game? What's the part of it that appeals to you the most? And the open answers were things like, why did you start playing? What has been most gratifying? Do you think you still would have played if the pandemic hadn't happened? And aspects like that. And I actually, when the survey closed, I was expecting around 100 replies. I got close to 2,000, which was very unexpected. And it was wonderful. Like, I'm definitely not complaining at all. Like, I got such an amazing response rate. And a lot of those responses, as I'm obviously still combing through the data because there's so much of it, a lot of people went into some really deep depth to tautologize myself with going through what the game meant to them and how they'd responded to it during the lockdown. And the idea was to then, as you say, follow up with some interviews based on mainly those open answer questions. If anybody had said something particularly interesting that I wanted to unpack further. Some people left some really tantalizing answers. Like, so for example, one person only got onto the game and only played it because they won a Switch and the game in a raffle. And they didn't elaborate further on that, and so I really want to know what the story was behind that, and whether they just played it because they ended up liking the game as a result of that, or they played it because they got it for free. It's that in particular gets to me. But yeah, so it would follow up with a few interviews to contextualize some of their responses with a bit more depth.
You mentioned that one of the aims of the research is to identify types of player persona. And, this is an area where I've done work, and I find this really interesting, and I think it might be useful to students to kind of know about, because the concept of persona has a number of different origins, but one of the places that it finds particular use at the moment is in visual communication design and graphic design. And personas is a strategy that designers will often use based on interviews and based on working with clients. They kind of generate this notion of a particular type of persona, not necessarily a character, but a type of client, a type of person that wants a specific set of experiences, a specific set of things. And so it becomes a really useful way to generate new knowledge about a quite a wide spectrum of audience motivations, desires, interests, processes, practices, and so on. I know it'd be very early days for you so far, but do you have a kind of sense of where some of these kind of characteristics are kind of generating kind of key personas of Animal Crossing fans?
Yeah, so what I found so far is that I expected there to be more of an overabundance of social players over solitary players. So social being people who play with other real life players and have them come to their island. Island hops are a common gameplay mode. Whereas the people who just play their island for themselves, I figured they'd be far fewer in comparison. But it's actually much more of an even split than I was expecting. And the elaborations on that have been interesting because a lot of people get... they fall under the gratification of enjoying having the routine, which is what I hypothesized, but a lot of them just appreciate it as kind of a Zen garden. So a Zen garden, for those who don't know, is the patch of sand with the little rocks, and you've got a rake, and the idea is you move it through the sand, and it's meant to be calming, and you reflect on Zen things. It's one of those things I never quite got into, but it's a method of self-reflection, and a lot of people, particularly those who were a few who noted in their open answer responses they were disconnected from family members who didn't play the game or who didn't have access to be able to join them on the island, found that it was a good way to reflect on their own peace of mind and reflect on their own ability to manage what's happening around them. And it was kind of a little escape for them, especially for people who are working from home and were able to put the computer down and go play on the Switch somewhere else to get that gratification. In terms of the specific roles of the game, that's been a little bit more all over the place than I expected as well, because the self-given means of players finding their own enjoyment, whether they're people who like the central goals of the game, or they like designing their own clothing, or getting all the resources on the island to build, and craft more things. I figured a lot of those playstyles would have some fairly easily identifiable characteristics. So the people who like the clothing design would probably be more social, because the clothing function in the game is when you design your own custom t-shirt or custom jacket, you can share it on the internet with a QR code.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's what excites me. One of the things that I'm really interested in is the sociality of paratextual productions. So where a player, a fan, is creating their online persona as a Animal Crossing fan by sharing the contents of the production of their game experience. Whether it's these, and I love this feature of the game where you can create something in the game and then you can share it online with a QR code. So you can have that social, that solitary play, but then it becomes social through this connection that the game enables.
Yeah.
I just find that fascinating.
It's really cool, and it's a social function that also doesn't necessitate you having to literally engage with players on your island. So you can like the fan communities, and especially like I'm on the Animal Crossing subreddit almost every day, is one of them. It's almost an adjacent multiplayer experience without you actually connecting with players physically in the game, because there are thriving markets for clothing codes, especially people who make like superhero costumes or outfits from TV.
Awesome. So good.
And it's like hundreds of thousands of players on these subreddits who get together for that. Or the other big thing is the turnip market. So you can buy turnips, which then you play sort of like the stock market, where you buy them one day and then you have to sell them back another day through the week. But the rate of exchange varies, and it's unpredictable how much you're going to get for selling your turnips back. So you could spend, hundreds of thousands of bells, the in-game currency, and then make none of it back. And that it has also spawned a giant a similar kind of multiplayer experience where people will tell others, hey, my island turnip rates are like really good, come and visit me and sell. And actually on that point, what surprised me again is that very few people actually that were responded to my survey, very few of them play the turnip market. Because I had that as I was expecting there'd be a few high rollers, who come in going, oh yeah, I make millions on the turnip market each week. And a lot of them were like, no, that's like the last thing I do, which again, I wasn't expecting.
I could totally talk to you about this for hours because I think it's fascinating. And I want to start bringing us to a conclusion, because I want to start talking about the ethics and your experience with the ethics of this project to kind of connect us to the material from last week. And I also want to kind of highlight to students that this kind of knowledge isn't just academic. This is the kind of knowledge that Nintendo, and is Nintendo the developer? Who's the developer?
Nintendo's the
publisher,
and there's another studio, and if you give me 1 second,
you're fine.
I will find it. But yeah.
But my point is that this kind of knowledge, this kind of insider information that you can get from participants in a qualitative study is the kind of information that you cannot get through other forms of, quantified data. Like Nintendo will have an idea, because of the internet connectivity, of the number of people playing the game at any one time. It will have an idea about the number of sales in different territories. It will have a rough idea of the age of players, but it won't have a deep understanding of why and how. And that's what ethnography can give companies, agencies, corporations, academics, a type of inside knowledge that you just otherwise you're just looking at the kind of you're kind of looking at the ant farm without knowing what the ants are thinking. I don't know why I made that metaphor. But you know what I mean? It's
Absolutely.
It's just looking at something through a glass wall without actually understanding what's going on. And so did you want to say something there?
It's a really fascinating idea. Just quickly, it is actually Nintendo who also did the game. Nintendo Entertainment Publishing and Development. So it's a fully them game. I thought there was another studio involved. It's a really it's a practice I'm surprised a lot of entertainment figureheads don't use more to refine their products, or to at least influence some of their decision making. The one other big one that stands out to me is Netflix, because they have the numbers that say how many people watch a show, but not the qualitative info that says this is why, or this is for how long we watched it as a group, over Skype, over Discord, or whatever. So it's a thing. It's a thing I would hope Nintendo would be interested in, because they are very much a company focused on community experience, on gaming that brings all people together. They're very family oriented. Animal Crossing, I should say, is a game that looks like it's at first blush made for kids, but is being played by people up to and including the elderly. And it's the thing where, and I know that the parts of their community management, their official community management, are listening and are watching and
Yes.
are sharing.
Yes, this is
so
the point I was going to make.
Yeah.
They're actually, because they hire community managers and they pay people to be in these subreddits, they have this emerging, evolving, continuous ethnographic pool of data that they can take from, and they can juxtapose that against what they're getting in terms of their raw quant numbers. And so their approach to ethnography is much less rigorous, and it's much more connected to marketing and advertising. And this is the kind of area where we start to get into kind of murky, questionable practices around the ethics of generating this kind of research, because they're not always upfront about it. I would be surprised if Netflix doesn't have a team of people who are monitoring the social network feeds, monitoring what people are saying, in a kind of surveillance form of ethnography. Whereas academics, when we want to generate this kind of knowledge, we have some rather rigorous hoops that we have to jump through. Do you want to just give us a quick kind of overview of your experience of what it took to even get permission to do this research?
So it was a lot. It was lengthy, but it's not about it being a hard process. Like, it's not like the things I had to answer were particularly like taxing, because I had the plan for the research, I had the question in mind, I had my references, I had the pitch that I'd given to the journal who'd accepted it, so it was a project that was happening. But what they're really concerned with in the human research ethics committee is about maintaining compliance with Australian legislation with anything to do with human research, making sure that participants are going to be made fully aware of what's happening and that they're protected at all times, that the data is going to be securely held onto and it's going to be disposed of when the project is over at a certain period. So a lot of what I had to do that made the process so long was in finessing my pitch to them to be more compliant. Now, my project was very low risk. And when I say low risk, I mean the topics I was looking at were unlikely to cause emotional distress. I wasn't going to be asking people to tell me their deepest, darkest secrets or do anything illegal or tell me how they played the game while, I don't know, using an illicit substance or something. And there wasn't there was no direct contact. Like, so everything was done virtually. Everything has been done virtually. And it's not like I'm doing, a medical project where there are obviously much bigger risks involved. So my project was way down the bottom of the totem pole in terms of the problems that could arise. But there were still things, even with that said, that I didn't account for when I put my first pitch in. And because it took a few rounds to get the project where the HREC wanted it, their first lot of feedback, a lot of it was stuff that I looked at and went, oh, of course I should do that. That's a no-brainer. So, for instance, they wanted me to have links to, because it's dealing with gaming, but also dealing with the pandemic, they wanted there to be resources for people who do experience emotional distress. So I've got things like a phone number for Lifeline and a phone number and website for Beyond Blue, and things that they can access if they do feel distress when they're in a survey or in the interview. Some of it was around the language, where some of what I'd written was a little ambiguous about how I was going to go about things and where things would be stored. They had some preferences on where you store your data and how you use your surveys. So I actually had to change programs at one point. I was going to be using just a Google Doc, but they wanted it done through Qualtrics, which actually turned out to be a better choice anyway, because the data is much easier to harvest from there. And then as the time goes on and they look at the submission again and again, it's just about having absolute clarity on your wording, your structure, your time frame, the ability of participants to withdraw, and when there's a point where they can't. So if you're doing interviews, and obviously they can't withdraw what they've told you after it's been published, so you've got to make some of that explicitly clear. And it's just, their main concern is ensuring absolute transparency, compliance with the legislation and keeping everyone safe and fit and happy through the whole thing.
I really liked what you mentioned there in terms of with regards to the COVID situation and the way in which the ethics committee was concerned with how participating in the study might not just help you generate new knowledge, but actually help your participant generate new knowledge. In answering these questions, they might come to some kind of realization that might cause them anxiety about something. And so you needed to have a mechanism to ensure that that could be addressed. And so that's, I just think that's a great outcome of that process. Like, I totally understand how laborious for something it's like, we're just playing games. Like, what are you stressed about? But actually, no. This can reveal types of stresses and anxieties that we might not encounter. And so
100%. And I would be assuming, based on some of the open responses I've read, there would have been some people who did experience that, because some of them talked about some really hard-hitting stuff, like, only in a paragraph or so, but it was still some things to do with, I mentioned before, disconnection from family in playing the game. Some people played it because they had anxiety because they'd lost their jobs. Some people, I think a couple may have even played the game while having COVID-19. So there's a lot in there, and it's all stuff that, like you say, I would have just thought, oh yeah, it's just us playing a cute little game, let's talk about it. But there's a lot you don't think about, and you don't think about until you're actually in the hot seat doing it. And that point you make about the benefits to people is also something I hadn't and should have considered more, because they ask you in the initial ethics submission to clarify what the benefits to academia is, which is easy because I've already done an abstract and I've got the journal on board and I've said in black and white what I want to do there. But then they say, okay, so what are you telling your participants? And just simply telling them that you're after their insight to enrich the discussion around the game isn't enough. And it was something that got caught in that first round, and I'm glad it did, because it was something I should have thought of from the beginning. And I was able to then reflect and go, okay, all of this stuff is going to help. I think in the proposal that got accepted, I said it's going to help people who are feeling a bit adrift and using the game for a sense of routine. It's going to help them articulate that a lot better. It's going to help them understand the dimensions of play, and also people who don't play the game to understand why it's gotten so big, and just basic things like that you really should think about earlier on, I think.
You could also make an even broader argument that in producing knowledge about the connection between, say, well-being and this game, you can contribute that to a broader knowledge about just how important these kinds of these kinds of cultural products can be immensely important to players and fans in times of crisis.
Absolutely. And there's a line to be drawn from here to Netflix, to Disney Plus,
exactly.
To all kinds of music, there's a ton of ways you could reach into that.
And games, when you see Current Affair and you see Channel 10 and Channel 9, games and addiction and games and violence, right? This is the common storyline. And you don't get actually people are getting through this difficult time with this little device called the Nintendo Switch and these cute little characters, and it's making people's lives better, and you don't get that otherwise. So awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Chris. I've got an investment in that. I'm really looking forward to seeing this article in the journal, and talking to you further about the results of this study. So thanks. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thanks, Chris.